I'm back from vacation with a brand spanking new Monster Monday, the best way to start your week. This time, we're checking out an element harnessing NPC, the Channeler. This creature is mostly inspired by the fact that Paizo has neglected to give us so much as a second dedicated primal caster. So, I made my own, in NPC form.
I'm gonna go build my own theme park with blackjack and hookers.
The Channeler calls upon primal magic and allows it to course through them as they unleash it, while retaining a portion of that magic within their form. Through this practice, the Channeler begins to embody the very spells that they cast, though they can only do so one at a time. This makes them function similar to a Gish, and I built the Channeler as such. I also built it as a level 13 creature, with the intent of calling upon some higher level magic to match its theme. It also sticks with only the humanoid trait, so that you can modify the Channeler to be whatever you want it to be for your campaign. With the idea of building the Channeler as a Gish, I decided to follow the Magical Striker roadmap, though that isn't immediately apparent with its ability scores. It starts with a high wisdom to facilitate its casting, but with the idea of it channeling these elements through its body, I also used a high constitution, drawing from the design of the kineticist and its use of that ability score. It still needs to beat people up, so it does have a strength score that is only 1 point below high. Its dexterity is moderate to keep with the physicality of the concept, which means that its intelligence and charisma alike are merely low, which is a far cry from its other mental score. On the topic of that wisdom, its perception is high and will have whatever senses the ancestor you decide to make it do. It doesn't have many skills, but it has 2 at a high value in the form of athletics and survival. With its wisdom, it's using a moderate nature skill, but then its acrobatic skill is merely low. One of the visual concepts I had for this was Udyr from League of Legends, as you should be able to tell, who doesn't look like the most nimble with his new build. Between his focus on spellcasting and martial combat, I needed to make sure that the Channeler had some weak points. One of those is only a moderate armor class, the design of which is also meant to play into its saving throws. Given its constitution and wisdom, it shouldn't be surprised that it has a high fortitude and will save, and it is unusual for me to do a build that features 2 high saves, especially where I kept the reflex low rather than terrible. Based on that, as well as its moderate AC, its HP is in between moderate and high, though a little bit closer to the former. This gives it some fairly simple defenses, which is probably good, because things are going to get a lot more complicated. Before they do, we only have a single strike to cover. Eschewing weapons, the Channeler instead opts to pummel adversaries with its fist. It comes out swinging with a high attack bonus, but only a low amount of damage, which is way below the suggested amount for a magical striker. There's a reason behind that, but before we can dig into it, we should talk spells. The Channeler has a range of spells that max out at 6th rank, 1 rank lower than what a level 13 character would normally bring to bear, which is a sacrifice for some of its martial prowess. Its spells use a high DC and a high spell attack roll, and cover a range of effects, though there are some commonalities between them. As promised, the Channeler uses the primal spell list, and has a heavy focus on elemental sort of spells. This particular Channeler that I have here focuses a bit more on air, electrical, and water spells, but I do have some other suggestions for GMs who want to switch up that elemental focus. I also included a number of spells that can draw upon multiple elements, or provide effects other than just dealing damage, even if that is what most of them do end up doing. Now at first glance, the Channeler doesn't actually have too many abilities. However, one of those abilities is kinda chunky. That is Form of Nature. Similar to the Magus's Arcane Cascade, this follows up the casting of a spell and even has effects based on the type of spell that was cast. For this ability specifically, we end up looking at the traits of the spell to see if it has any elements associated with it. That element lingers within the Channeler's body, changing them into a form somewhere between man and elemental. This provides some standard benefits, such as extra damage on these strikes, and related spells that the Channeler slings. The former does get the Channeler to the average for high damage, which is far more in line with where we want it to be as a magical striker. Meanwhile, the bonus on spells is inspired by the Sorcerer's potency of the, well, obviously Sorcerer. However, that is barely scratching the surface of what all this ability does. The elemental traits have forms associated with them, some of which have been grouped together for the sake of simplicity. The first of these is the fickle form, and it is the elemental form, the form of nature, for air, electricity, or water. This changes the damage it provides to strikes depending on what precisely it used, and it also gives the Channeler a flight or swim speed, as well as the ability to move without provoking reactions. Opposite those sorts of elements is the stalwart form, drawn from earth or metal. This grants the Channeler a pretty gnarly physical resistance, and makes its fist heavy and harmful enough to gain the forceful trait. The temperamental form encompasses both cold and fire, and causes the Channeler to spread a chilling frost or blazing inferno around it, which deals unlimited use area damage with a moderate DC. As players try to force their way through the harsh environment. It also has a slight defensive aspect, granting immunity to its associated energy type. We also see this in the toxic form of nature, though we do mix things up a bit by making the extra damage normally added to the fist into persistent damage instead. Furthermore, contact with the Channeler in this state deals about unlimited use area damage to any creature that it comes into contact with.
Who is unworthy to lick the mud off the heels of my platform shoes? Boogaloogaloogalooge.
That brings us to the Vigorous form, and this might be the most defensive option, as it comes with fast healing that is counterbalanced with a weakness to fire. Additionally, it causes roots or vines to erupt from the ground, which attempt to tangle up enemies with a moderate DC reflex save and a similar DC to escape. Alright, that is one whole ability covered. Whew, okay. Moving on from that, the other abilities of the Channeler require to be in a form of nature before they can even be used. The first of these is Natural Connection, a reaction triggered by the start of its turn while being in a form of nature. This simply allows it to sustain a spell without having to spend an actual action to do so. A nice and simple palate cleanser after that behemoth of an ability. However, the next set of abilities need a bit of discussion. I designed the Channeler with the intent of having each focus on certain elements. You may field a Storm Channeler that mainly wields spells of air, electricity, and water, or perhaps an Earthen Channeler who calls upon the might of Rock and Stone.
Rock and stone!
And some metal every now and then. To that end, I prepared some suggested spells to swap in, as well as an ability that focuses on each form. The main stat block features a Storm Channeler, which is armed with Fickle Flow. This features the Traversal trait, something that is being introduced in Starfinder to allow alternate forms of movement when a stride is called for. For example, while this does say that the Channeler strides twice, it could fly or swim instead if it has access to those speeds. When it does so, it can briefly but fully convert itself into wind, electricity, or water, and move through other creatures, akin to the Trample ability, as it deals its fist strike damage, including the bonus, but all converted to its damage bonus type. This forces a high DC save, but doesn't use the 3 actions of the Trample because it has to 1. Be in its Fickle form to use it, and 2. Then goes on a cooldown. Moving on to some of the other abilities, a Stalwart Channeler can shift into a Living Avalanche. This allows the Channeler to stride up to half its speed, gathering momentum before striking out with a grievous blow that sends the earth churning forth in a 30-foot cone. Creatures in this area take between limited use and unlimited use area damage on a high DC reflex save. Critically failing the saves sees those creatures knocked off their feet by the Stony Surge. Critically failing the save sees the creature knocked off its feet by the Stony and Steely Surge. I imagine temperamental channelers are going to be pretty numerous given the number of fire spells available in the game. With some inspiration from my good old buddy Decaf, the temperamental channeler's unique ability is Hell Freezes Over, which ignites the ground or covers it in incredible cold. This turns it into hazardous terrain for a full minute, one of the few of these sorts of abilities which last beyond the channeler's form of nature. Other than that, it is a pretty simple one, which means we can take a look at our next ability. The toxic spill of the toxic channeler is also a little unique, but more in the fact that it takes only a single action to activate. This can affect the persistent damage on the channeler's strikes, or from any spells that it might cast. It adds a minor debuffing effect in the form of Sicken, and prevents that condition from being removed until the persistent damage ends. Unlike the other abilities, this does not have a cooldown, so the channeler can spam this from round to round to try to spread that debuff. That leaves us with the rampant overgrowth of the Vigorous Channeler. This forces a high DC Fortitude save from nearby creatures, which might seem strange. Roots and vines erupting from the ground and you have to use Fortitude to avoid them? That decision was based off of the fact that grapple checks are made against a creature's Fortitude DC, since failing the save does cause a creature to become grabbed in this case. We do go a bit farther than that by dealing damage to creatures that end their turn still trapped in the strangling foliage, which merely requires a moderate DC escape attempt. This is another one of those longer duration abilities, but it does require a sustain from the channeler. On the other hand, sustaining gives it a new chance to tangle targets trespassing in its terrain. You know, despite the baseline channeler only having 3 abilities, that still felt like a lot to go through. Empowered by the elements, this eminent enemy inflames, electrocutes, or eviscerates even excellent entrants in excruciating engagements. While my initial concept features making a character who focuses on a single form, you could include multiples of the form-based abilities to represent a more diverse array of elements. When it comes to slotting these NPCs into your campaigns, these primal gishes might bring down nature's fury on those that have profaned it, or simply be grouchy ascetics that challenge those that intrude upon their domain. There are dozens of ways you could take this, and this is due to the fact that NPCs tend to lend themselves to a wider array of encounter hooks more than monstrous creatures, enabling you to come up with whatever motivation might suit them best. Let me know what you think of this Menace and what other creatures you'd like to see in a comment. If you like what you saw here, maybe leave a like, and if you want to see more, subscribe, or check out the Monster Monday blog, which is linked below along with the Twitter and Discord. Thanks for watching, and have a monstrous Monday.
Breathe in the wild. Breathe out the spirits and fight.